Your view on divorce and remarriage is narrower than many other Christians, even in your church. How does this affect your ministry to them? Well, that's true, and it might be good to just clarify what that means. My understanding is that Christ's ideal for marriage is one man, one woman, in covenant, as long as they both shall live, so that if a divorce happens, that does not free a person to remarry as long as the spouse is living. That's a very minority view. It's not one that is shared by, I suppose, a lot of Christians, but that's where I am. It's my understanding of all the texts in the Gospels, as well as Jesus as well as Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 and 7, Romans 7. The way it affects my people is that I preached a series of messages on marriage, and 2 of them were on this issue, and I simply looked them right in the eye and I said, we as a church do not have one mind on this. Not even the leaders, the elders do not have one mind on this. What do? You cannot, in a church, discipline people single-handedly. That's not what church discipline is. Church discipline is when the church acts. So if a church doesn't have a mind on something, it can't act. It can't put somebody out of the church for an act that the church is divided in half or over. So we have to find who we are as a church. And so what we did was we came up with a statement that I and all the elders could agree on. We would go as far biblically as we could find one mind together, and then that functions as the way we hold each other accountable. Now, emotionally, it's awkward. It is. And yet I have been so thankful that given how much we share in common with each other at deeper, bigger, stronger, eternal levels, even people, divorced people, who know I disapprove of what they did, can relate to me and I to them, because my position is that once you have entered a marriage you shouldn't have entered, God can redeem it. I mean, there are many people who are in marriages that they themselves would say, I shouldn't have entered. Might have married an unbeliever, for example, and now she's a believer, but divorce would be one, that would be another. And they know it shouldn't have happened, and yet given the nature of grace and God's ability to redeem something, there's so many places in the Bible where he redeems things that shouldn't have been and uses them for his glory, that they know that I'm saying to them right now, I am for this marriage that you're in. Shouldn't have happened, and I will work with you to make it as good as it can possibly be. So not everybody clicks with that, but plenty do, and I think because of grace, we can have a very redemptive relationship. In most social settings, I'm consumed with wondering whether I'll meet my future spouse there. It's distracting and discouraging. How can I long to be married without obsessing about it? I suppose the dynamics of that question and that answer relate not just to marriage, but almost any strong desire that you have, especially desire relating to people. So my mind kind of broadens out from the marriage issue just to the why do we obsess about anything? Why do we have overweening preoccupations with anything? And the reason is because God and his Son don't have the place in our hearts that they should have. I think the human heart is a God-shaped vacuum. Pascal said that. And it's designed for God to fill. And if we have small views of God and inadequate perceptions of His greatness and His glory and His love for us and His sufficiency for us, then there'll be these big cavernous places in our souls that are churning out these desires that are just huge and controlling, whether it's a spouse or whether it's sexual things or money or praise of man or revenge. A lot of people are just consumed. They can't seem to shake it. And I think the answer there is not so much fight, 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 stop doing that, but rather devote yourself to knowing God, loving God. Immerse yourself in the Word. So when it comes to a spouse, I think you say, of course, I'd like to be married, and Lord, would you work that? Would you do that? And then rest in Him. Delight yourself in the Lord. Get all of your desires focused on Him, and then those desires will be managed in such a way that in due season God will satisfy them. That's what we're doing with our fighter verse this week. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. And we were talking about that at staff meeting the other day in relation to marriage, and I forget who said it. I think one of the young women with Campus Outreach said, the problem is we treat delight yourself in the Lord like a tool. Like, okay, I've done that. Why aren't I married yet? As though delight yourself in the Lord is a quick little turn the key, get what you want. It isn't like that. It's delighting yourself in the Lord is an all-consuming, day-by-day quest to bring all of our desires into that one great desire so that He does satisfy. So you walk into a group of people and your mindset would be, Lord, I'm just going to be there for others like you've been there for me. I'm not going to look at every person as a candidate for how they can do for me what my cavernous needs require right now. You've met those needs. I'm going to be there for others. And you do what you want. I'll trust you. So getting the orientation off of our needs onto the needs of others, and that's only possible if God fills up that vacuum, which means we should really devote ourselves to knowing Him and being content in Him. How do you decide what to preach at weddings without repeating yourself too much? Or is it saying the same basic thing every time is saying the same basic thing every time not a problem? I don't do now nearly as many weddings as I used to. I've got folders just chock full of wedding homilies. And in my first 10, 15 years, I hardly ever repeated a wedding homily. I've got at least 60 wedding homilies that are different. And the answer is, how do you decide what to preach? Is you preach on anything that relates to love, or anything that relates to anger, or anything that relates to greed, or anything that relates to money, and then you apply it to their wedding. One of the most controversial weddings I ever did, I think, was I preached at a good friend. They're good friends to this day, but I didn't realize till later it was controversial. He was in medical school or going to medical school, and so I took as my text that you shouldn't want to be rich, and just said the biggest temptation you're going to be facing, one of the biggest you're going to be facing as a married couple, is that after you finish the medical job, you're going to make a lot of money, and that's really dangerous for a marriage. And so may I warn you about that and give you some ideas for how to handle it. And I found out later everybody at the wedding didn't like what I said. I do that all the time. I remember I did the same kind of thing for David and Edith Carlson. They're still here. I did that wedding, 26-7 years ago, and she's a librarian in the church here. And I can remember the sermon on money and simplicity of life in the old chapel, and they loved it, I think, because I knew where they were. And so basically, any truth can be a marriage sermon. You just then apply it to, here are two human beings. They happen to be, man and wife at this point, but two human beings who are going to have to relate to each other in some really tough situations. And the whole Bible relates to that. So I think pastors should try to say fresh things and not feel like they have to come back to Ephesians 5 every time. You know, we're going to weave it in somewhere probably that the meaning of this marriage at its heart is this is a symbol of covenant-keeping love between Christ and His church. But you don't have to preach on Ephesians 5 every time and say that as your main point every time, because there are 100 things to say that are fresh and good and powerful and that will be needful for this marriage. I'm just trying to think if there are any others I could remember that would be unusual. I've preached several times using my cow pie analogy that you need to develop a compost pile in your marriage, because as soon as you step out of this church, one of you is going to put your foot in a cow pie, and it's going to stink, and the relationship's going to be messed up. And what are you going to do with it? Walk around in it all day, come back to it, smell it every day? No, you take it and you throw it in the compost pile, and you go over and live in the green grass. But you know that issue still exists. You might have to go over and deal with it every now and then. And as you walk through life, you're going to be putting your foot in one cow pie after the other of relational difficulty and sin. And some people just live there, and it makes life totally impossible if you live in your cow pies. And it is possible to take each one, put it in the compost, know it's there, look each other right in the eye and say, I don't like this about you. I don't like this about you either. Okay, we're leaving that, and we're going over here, and we're living with what we love. It really, I think, is, a lot of people tell me they don't like that, but it's my way of doing it, and I think it's helpful. What should a godly couple do who is considering marriage to make sure sexual sins from previous relationships are dealt with? Number one, total candor and total honesty about what you've done before you marry. I think that's the idea. Considering marriage, yeah. Total. Now that's going to be really hard. I mean, some people are going to say, this would be better if she didn't know, or he didn't know. I don't think so. Noelle and I did not have sex with anybody before we married. Neither each other nor anybody else, unless she's not telling me the truth. And I think she is telling me the truth. But she had a boyfriend or two. And I remember being uncomfortable with that and wondering, what do they do? They do anything? Misbehave? And so I asked her one time, did you ever kiss him? Because we're talking high school. And she said, yeah. Everything in me did not like that, you know? Isn't that strange? I mean, people today are so fast and loose with their sexuality. A kiss that probably didn't mean anything to anybody, but did to me. I wanted to say, how? I didn't go there. But I'm resonating with this question and the problems. I am glad that I knew that first. And here's one of the reasons why. We'd been married probably 2 years, I can't remember exactly. It was within the first 3 years. We were living in Pasadena, California. Noelle gets a letter in the mail and starts to cry. She goes outside. She walks outside to be away from me. I let her go. I said, whoa, what is that? And I walk out after a while and say, what's wrong? And she said, Jackson was just killed in Vietnam. This is the old boyfriend. I'm glad I knew about Jackson at that point, because I think it just helped me deal with the fact that this isn't a hidden, whoa, way too much devotion invested in Jackson here, you know? And so I just think it's going to backfire if you don't tell the truth. So that's my first point, is that candor and honesty about what you've been through. If you can't deal with each other's backgrounds, you probably can't deal with life, you know? Marriage is trust, and you got to trust with what, you know, the junk that's in the past and whatever might be coming in the future. Second, that's not, I mean, honesty is not the main thing. It's just a crucial thing and was big for us. Marriage is considering marriage to make sure sexual sins from previous relationships are dealt with. They have to be dealt with God first. Then they can be dealt with each other. In other words, if both of you know Christ has forgiven my sins, in Jesus Christ I'm as pure as the driven snow, and my resolves to walk in chastity and walk in purity from this day forward and be a virgin for you until we're married count for something. To know justification by faith alone, to know the purifying work of the blood of Christ, is a glorious thing, so that you can look at each other and say, I'm looking at you the way Jesus looks at you. And if you're enjoying the forgiveness of Jesus, I'm going to enjoy forgiving you the way Jesus does, and that He's forgiven you that way. If He's blotted out all that sexual sin, I'm going to blot out all that sexual sin. So I think the essence of the answer is we deal with it gospel-like, in forgiveness and justification vertically, so that we can hand that to each other as a gift on our wedding day, that same forgiveness. How should God's willingness to divorce in Jeremiah 3:8 affect our view of divorce? Well, we referred to that in an earlier question. I don't think God ever did divorce. The language of divorce in Jeremiah, I think, is used precisely to take it back. In other words, when he writes his wayward wife a, quote, bill of divorcement and sends her away into exile, he goes to get her. So I don't think God ever divorced His people. There was a legal separation of 70 years during which He punished His people. And the language of cutting off or ending the relationship was used only to take it back again, to say, I'll never let you go. And it comes most clearly in Hosea, where the language is, I'm done with you. And then in chapter 11, my heart grows warm. How can I let you go, O Ephraim? So I think it should affect our view of divorce by saying God never divorces, and we shouldn't either if we can help. Not all Christians can stop a divorce from happening. I'm not going to lay that on every Christian. I'm dealing with a guy right now in our church. I spent an hour with him yesterday, and his wife is on him so hard for a divorce, and he doesn't want one, and he's wondering what to do, and it may go that way. You know, you can refuse to sign the papers, and then it'll take 18 months instead of 3 weeks to get it done. But you can't stop divorce from happening in our culture if somebody wants it to happen bad enough. So I don't want to, when I say don't do it, I don't mean it won't happen to you. Is it biblical to think that physical attraction must be a component of a godly marriage? No, I don't think it is biblical to think that way, and I don't think it's rational to think that way either. It would have two implications. Number one, no homely people would get married. No plain people would get married. And those who get married when they're pretty and then change when they get old, like me, lose your hair, get wrinkles, get flabby, would fall out of love and would have no good marriages anymore. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And yet, I suppose the question is asked because there is such an emphasis, I guess, on in our culture that if you don't look really attractive, you're probably not going to get married. If you don't look really attractive, you're probably going to cause your wife to, or your husband maybe, to go looking for somebody else. And there's a lot of books, I suppose, out there that say to a wife, going to lose this guy if you don't stay really pretty. Well, she should try to stay as attractive as she can. But you can't put that on her. You can't make his faithfulness the criteria. I mean, the outcome of her looks. That's just not the way it works. We are called as men to be faithful the way Jesus is faithful to his bride, and his bride, frankly, stinks. We are not that attractive. He died to make us attractive, according to Ephesians, but I think when Jesus looks at us, if he doesn't look at us in Jesus, he's not going to be excited about this marriage feast at the end of the age. The word biblical here maybe is intended to take me to a text. And of course, the texts that come to mind are, when it speaks to beauty, is don't let your beauty be the outward beauty of the wearing of gold and the braiding of hair and the wearing of clothes. And it doesn't say fine clothes, so you know it's not an absolute, like, okay, not wearing clothes is going to be a good thing. It means the jewelry, the hair, the clothes are not the focus. And our culture needs to hear that unbelievably. Marriages need to hear it. Men need to hear it. That's not the main focus of beauty. The focus should be the inner spirit. So women should ask, what kind of spirit should I cultivate for my man? As well as, should I eat and dress and exercise for my man? And the man, the same. What kind of inner spirit makes her flourish? Because there is a kind of spirit in a man that kills a woman, or frightens a woman, or bores a woman. And a man shouldn't mainly be, pumping iron, because frankly, most women could care very little about what their husbands look like, unless they're just making fools of themselves. They want a spirit, a strength, a humility, a nobility, pick me up and sweep me away. Women read, in their worst moments, they don't look at pornography, usually, but they read novels about exciting romances, because their husbands are so boring. And so it cuts both ways. I think we husbands should labor not so much with the outward man, and women should labor so much with the outward woman, but rather cultivate the kind of beauty that we all deeply long for in relationships. A marriage is a relationship. It's when you're old and gray and wrinkled and overweight or underweight or squinty and bent over and hobbling along. Maybe you'll be holding hands at 85 because of the inner beauty. I want to get married, but the woman I love has a chronic illness. It's getting worse and worse. Some family members tell me I shouldn't commit myself to her, but I believe that God is calling me to serve her in this way. Is it foolish to marry someone I know will die soon? Well, I've got stories like this. Is it foolish? No, not foolish. Not if all the other things are in place, okay? Any marriage could be foolish, but this isn't the main reason that a marriage would be foolish. Marrying an unbeliever would be foolish. Marrying when you're totally incompatible theologically would be foolish. Marrying when you're immature and you don't have resources would be foolish. There are a lot of reasons why marriage would be foolish. But loving a person who's dying is not one of them, I don't think. Especially since you're free to remarry when a spouse dies. Now, I'm sure the person asking this isn't thinking that way, like, well, I'll marry again in 3 years after they're dead. That's not the way they're thinking. They're thinking, I love this person. I want to live with this person. And I want to care for this person. And I think that's beautiful. So, I did the wedding of a man who was dying of leukemia. And the marriage was less than a year. Everybody knew it would be less than a year. It was very awesome. She was beautiful, he was handsome, and 9 months later, he was dead. And that was the plan. I know another situation where a woman, and she'll watch this probably, married a man with AIDS who had conquered in his soul his homosexual inclinations. That lasted about, I think, 6 years maybe, and then he died. And that was beautiful. So I know it must be very painful for parents to look at this and think, don't you realize how much pain this is going to bring into your life? But so what else is new, right, about life and about marriage? So I would say that's not the main issue here, is theologically, personally, resource-wise, are you able to be harmoniously, sweetly, deeply in love with Jesus together in this marriage? My parents are both believers and have been married 30 years. Recently, my mom moved out and is very bitter. What can I do to help them as a son? Well, I get that question every month or so after church, it seems like, recently. What can I do to help them as a son? Well, it's interesting that the mom moved out here and it's a son we're talking about, because that creates a special dynamic with the dad. And so lots of things can be done. The first thing I'm thinking about is pray, which is obvious. Oh God, humble them and open their hearts and make them willing to hear anything that I might say. Second, I don't know who's sinning here mainly. Did Dad drive her out with abuse, or did she leave an arrogant preference for another man? I don't know. So all those things are going to affect how he responds. But he would try to encourage his mom not to lose her faith, to be strong, to humble herself, to be willing to work through counseling. That is, try to get them both to pursue. Don't encourage their ongoing long-term separation, but encourage their efforts at reconciliation. And then, if he's old enough and he's strong enough, I think, to get in their face, get in Dad's face. Why did you do what you did? Or Mom, this isn't right. And try to point them to biblical truths, to Christ as the answer to their pain. And then to do it with submissive, humble, childlike, to say, Mom and Dad, you've reared me, I am who I am, and I'm heartbroken that this is happening to you. There's a spirit in which you go when you're going to do a kind of rebuking to a parent. There's a spirit of humility and lowliness that is possible. What can parents do to keep from having favorites among their children? Let me just give a reality check here, okay, first. Every parent has seasons when one child is behaving better than other child. And you like children to behave, and therefore you like what this child is doing better than the other ones. And these kids are going through phases, just one after the other. They're up and they're down and they're all over the place. So if favorites means you like them the way they are better than the other, that's going to be true at any given time. And you might as well be honest about it. And then the question is, how do you avoid letting that become a abiding, strong preference with preferential treatment, preferential care, preferential praise? Those are the issues. And so I suppose the first answer is know that God, in relating to His family, loves His children and loves them all. And you are loved by God, though you don't deserve to be loved. In other words, let the gospel have its deep effect on you as a person in God's family to make you feel stunned that you're even in the family. So be glad that God has been gracious to you, so that you come at all your children then with a gracious disposition. This is what I think is the biggest issue for parents, is are they coming toward their children with grace that the children can perceive. It isn't conditioned primarily upon the child's performances and behavior. Do they discern in and through good and bad behavior, Mommy and Daddy love me, they're there for me, they're on my side? Or do they get constantly communicated, their love really rises and falls entirely with my behavior? So that's the first thing. Get a good gospel foundation of grace, so that you, as you look at your children, the fact that one is in a phase of mess right now does not mean you don't love him. In fact, I would guess that there have been phases where one of my boys is so displeasing to me, he's getting all the attention. And the others feel must be the favorite. Well, he's not the favorite at this point. He's just the neediest. And so it's very, very complicated. I think the second thing I would say is labor to be proactive in the way you love your kids, not just reactive. That might be almost the same thing what I just said, but might make it a little clearer. That is, if you're only reactive, you're doing things for them and saying things to them as reactions to what they just did or said, then there's inevitably going to be an appearance of favoritism, because the good little kid over here, the firstborn, he's just going to be not negatively reacting to him, whereas second, third, fourth, you're going to be bang, 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 and the feeling is favorite. And that's all rooted in, as a parent, I'm just reacting all the time. And so you need a positive sense of, I will proactively come toward my children with wisdom, with grace, with guidance, with love, with benefits, before and independent of, to a degree, their way of talking, their way of acting. Third thing that comes to mind is just to be aware of the problem. This person is way down the line in answering the question by simply being aware that is a problem, and thinking through why it's a problem of playing favorites with your children. What a parent wants to do is not say your behavior doesn't matter. It does matter. You're going to get a spanking if you do this, or you're going to get some time out, or you're not going to take the car this weekend, or there are consequences. And yet you want to have an overarching communication that every one of you are precious to me. So I wanted my sons, now I've got a daughter coming along, but I'll just say this once, they're all up and out of the house. I wanted them growing up to say, Daddy is really glad I'm in this family. And Daddy is always there for me. I'll give a little teeny tip here. When the boys reached 12, we had this special outing. Pizza Hut or some nicer restaurant, since Pizza Hut was the date place. And I had a little speech planned, about the birds and the bees, and about being a boy, and about sexuality, and about girls, and about dating, and about whatever. And I would say to them, okay, freedom is coming, and I can't control you. You can be on your own. I just want you to know I am totally there for you anytime, anywhere. If you go with some guys, I give them this example, if you go with some guys to after a ball game thing, and it turns out to be totally what you didn't know it was going to be, like there's going to be sex there, there's going to be drinking there, whatever, and you're in somebody else's car, and you're there, and you don't want to be there, I will walk on glass to come get you, and you don't have to say a word. On the phone, I'm at such and such, I'd like out of here. And I'm there, no questions asked. So just a dad who says that to every son, I think creates, with all the diversities of the boys, deep down, there's one common thing here. He's there for us, and we can count on him. What should a wife's submission to her husband look like if he's an abuser? Oh my. Part of that answer is clearly going to depend on what kind of abuse we're dealing with here. How serious this is. Is her life in danger? Or is this verbal unkindness? I'm not sure what the person who asked the question had in mind. So let me just talk about maybe different kinds. A woman's submission to her husband is rooted in the Word of God, calling her to be, for the Lord's sake, submissive to him, which means she always has a higher allegiance, namely to Christ. And therefore Christ's word governs her life. And Christ has many words besides be submissive. Be submissive is not an absolute, because her Lord has other things to tell her, so that if the husband tells her something that contradicts what the Lord tells her, then she's got a crisis there of, to whom do I submit now? And clearly she submits to Jesus above the Lord, of her husband. And the reason she's submitting to her husband is because of her prior superior submission to the Lord. So, if this man, for example, is calling her to engage in abusive acts willingly, group sex, or something really weird, bizarre, harmful, that clearly would be sin, then the way she submits, and I really think this is possible, it's kind of paradoxical. She's not going to go there. I'm just saying, no, she's not going to do what Jesus would disapprove, even though the husband is asking her to do it. She's going to say, however, something like, honey, I want so much to follow you as my leader. God calls me to do that, and I would love to do that. It would be sweet to me if I could enjoy your leadership. And so then she would say, but if you ask me to do this, require this of me, then I can't go there. Now that's one kind of situation. Just a word on the other kind. If it's not requiring her to sin, but simply hurting her, then I think she endures verbal abuse for a season, and she endures perhaps being smacked one night, and then she seeks help from the church. I mean, every time I deal with somebody in this, I find the ultimate solution under God in the church. In other words, this man should be disciplined. This man should be disciplined. She should have a safe place in a body of Christ where she goes, and then the people in the church deal with him. She can't deal with him by herself. So the short answer, I think, is the church is really crucial here. To step in, be her strength. Say to this man, you can't do this. You cannot do this. That's not what we allow. That's not what Christ calls you to be. So I can't go into all the details, but I would say, I would say to a woman, come to a church that you feel safe in, tell them the case, let the leaders step in and help you navigate the difficulties here. My spouse is being nominated for church leadership, but our household, especially our marriage, is not in order. What should I do? So that, I assume, is a wife probably saying that a husband is being nominated for something like the eldership. And the elders, according to the Bible, are supposed to have houses that are in order, children well managed, and an admirable relationship with a husband or a wife. And she's saying she knows things they don't know, or either they don't care. Now, whether it's because they don't know or it's because they don't care is going to make a difference in how she deals with this. But I think, at least as one elder who is recruiting other elders, would want to know. And I think biblically, she would have a responsibility to share with an elder, maybe one or two that she knows, and say, have you considered interviewing, or have you considered asking these questions to my husband to see whether you think his understanding of the qualifications and his living them out is yours? So I think that's what she should do, is approach an elder. Now, if they're, so that's based on the fact that they may not know the situation. If they knew it, they would, I hope, redemptively enter his life and say, come on, we need to spend a year now working on this, because we see evidences of leadership in your life and biblical faithfulness in your life, but here's a piece that needs work before we go forward. That's wonderful when that happens, especially if he's agreeable. If she's in a church where the elders are just lackadaisical and they don't even think that way, then she's got another issue. She's got to find, I hope, somebody who would have some sense of empathy with her concern and see if they can help the elders grow in their understanding of biblical criteria. But that would be more complicated, because they may just say, oh, you're being too picky or whatever. And in that case, I think she would just have to pray and let it go, because she can't control what the church does. She might say, and I would encourage her to say to her husband, you know, as long as we haven't got this resolved, or the kids are this way, do you think you should maybe wait? So I think that would probably be wise. I'm a believer. My husband isn't. He makes all our family's money and obviously doesn't like the idea of tithing. What should I do? Well, I think the simplest thing is to say, if you originate no income, God doesn't expect you to give any income. So that's a simple answer. I could stop right there. But that's not going to satisfy her, probably, and she wants more than that. And so I think probably the way a husband like this would work is he would probably say to her, she could say to him, can I count any of your income as mine and have discretion over it? Because, you know, I work, I keep this house, I keep our children, I'm full-time here. This is a partnership. I know that you go outside, but I do the home. I make this happen. Could I? And not to deceive him in any way, just totally open and above board. He knows where she's going. Can I count some of this as discretionary for me? I know that it's not your preference to give money to what you don't believe in, but you know that I believe in this, and it's helping me, I hope, be a really good wife for you. I'm faithful to you. I serve you. I'm physically and sexually there for you. I admire many things about you. I'm glad I'm married to you. I think a Christian wife can say those kinds of things to an unbelieving husband. And then meekly and humbly say, may I know you don't want us to give 10% of our income away, but can we just come up with a number that is mine to work with? And I would guess that a husband, an unbelieving husband, would do that. At least that would be the direction I would go if I were. Then she tithes what she senses and he agrees she's getting because of her engagement here. I mean, it's sad when you have to think about it that way. In our marriage, I like to think about all my money is Noelle's, and all hers is mine. If she gets some royalties because she does a children's book and puts it in the bank, I want to think that's our money. We can give that to the church. We can do whatever we want. And everything that I get from the church, I want to say it's there. I don't like separate bank accounts. I just think we ought to be totally at each other's disposal and have our money be each other's. But that's not going to work where a husband doesn't have your same values. He's not following Christ. And so that would be, I think, my approach to her is seek his willingness to count some of the money as hers, and then ask if she can just do with it according to her own
priorities.